It started like any other friendship you build in your early 20s. Casual, light, based mostly on shared memes, boba runs, and venting about midterms or bad Tinder dates. I had moved into a new apartment in a mid-sized city just a few blocks from my university and was eager to meet people outside of class. Maybe finally build one of those close-knit friend groups you always see on Netflix, shows where everyone has keys to each other's place and shows up with takeout without asking. That kind of intimacy seemed far away from how I grew up, but I figured, hey, maybe adulthood starts with letting people in. So when I met Clara, let's call her that in one of my electives, and she sat next to me and complimented my water bottle stickers, it felt like the start of something. Clara had that kind of presence you couldn't ignore. Not loud exactly, but effortless. Her eyeliner was always sharp, her sarcasm always just biting enough to make people laugh but never flinch. She had an Instagram following that hovered around 15K, which at the time felt huge to me, and a wardrobe that looked like it belonged to someone either perpetually going to a concert or an expensive thrift store photo shoot. I'll admit, I was flattered when she wanted to hang out more. She'd text me at odd hours asking if I wanted to go on a 1 a.m. diner run, or borrow a jacket for some shoot she was doing with a friend, or help her sort through old clothes to sell on Depop. It felt spontaneous, almost cinematic, like I was being swept into someone else's more interesting life. And somewhere in the middle of all that, she started taking pictures of me. At first, it was casual. "You have such a symmetrical face," she said once, half through a sip of iced coffee, and before I knew it, I was sitting in a patch of sunlight in my living room, a hoodie half off one shoulder, and my hair tousled like I'd just woken up, while she clicked away on her DSLR. I didn't think much of it, she said. She needed warm bodies for her art portfolio, and I wasn't shy. I'd grown up on the internet like everyone else. Filters, selfies, curated moments, all that was second nature. Posing in front of her lens didn't feel weird. It felt aesthetic, artsy, safe. And if I'm honest, I kind of liked it. It felt empowering to see myself through her camera, moodily lit, bathed in golden hour, laughing mid-bite at some ramen bowl she told me to hold just so. The photos weren't overtly sexy, but they weren't all innocent either. Some had a certain intimacy to them, bare shoulders, biting my lip, dreamy stares that were more romance novel than student ID. Clara would always laugh it off. "You're like unintentionally hot," she'd say, then immediately snap another frame. She asked if she could edit them and post a few, tagging me, hyping me up with captions like, "My muse," and "How is she real?" I blushed every time, half in pride, half in embarrassment. But her followers loved it. A few even messaged me random guys with usernames like Studio, Grunge, or Film, Boy22, asking if I modeled. I didn't. I was just vibing, living life, making memories, trusting my friend. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that behind those filtered, cropped, carefully edited portraits, behind the captions and clout and compliments, Clara had started building something else. Something I never agreed to. Something I wouldn't find out about until months later, when it was already too late. And by then, the damage was already done. It took me longer than it should have to notice the cracks. The first was subtle, a message request on Instagram from someone I didn't know saying, "Hey, I just saw you on that site. You're stunning BW." I stared at it for a minute, confused. What site? I figured it was spam, or a bot, maybe a scammer trying to get me to click a sketchy link. So I deleted it and moved on. But over the next few weeks, similar messages trickled in, sometimes vague, sometimes explicit. "How much for a set?" one read. "Can you send more like the ones from your last shoot?" another asked. I felt my stomach knot each time, but I didn't respond. I thought maybe it was just weird people online, or some kind of mix-up after all. Clara had been posting a lot of artsy photos of me, and the internet is a weird place. I told myself I was overreacting, that it was nothing. The second crack was harder to ignore. I was at a house party. Clara had invited me to the kind with too many people crammed into a too small apartment, LED lights casting everything in purple, music thumping from a Bluetooth speaker with just enough bass to make your ribs vibrate. I was in the kitchen, sipping lukewarm seltzer, when a guy I didn't recognize came up to me and said, "Hey, aren't you that girl from the exclusive set?" I blinked at him. "What?" I asked. He smirked like we were in on some joke together. "Clara's friend. You're the one she takes those pictures of. You've got fans, you know." I left the party early. The next morning I couldn't shake the feeling. I scrolled through Clara's Instagram, checking all the posts she'd tagged me in, looking for anything I'd missed. Nothing looked out of place, just filtered shots of me smiling, posing, laughing, looking away from the camera like every influencer ever. But something felt off. I remembered how she always insisted on shooting in RAW format, saying it gave her more editing freedom. I remembered the folders on her laptop labeled with my name. I remembered how, once, I'd asked her to delete a photo I didn't like, and she'd shrugged, saying, "Sure," but I'd never seen her actually do it. It wasn't until I stumbled across a Reddit thread late one night, one of those niche forums where people trade stories about shady online behavior, that it all clicked. Someone had posted a warning about amateur content being sold without consent, mentioning a girl whose artsy portraits had been repurposed and uploaded to a paid content site. The username wasn't Clara's, but the tone sounded familiar. And the example photos blurred just enough to hide the face, but not the clothing, not the room in the background, not the tattoo on my shoulder. Those were mine. Panic set in. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there staring at the ceiling, heart pounding, trying to piece together the timeline, the logic, the betrayal. I trusted her. I let her into my apartment. I let her take pictures of me in my pajamas, in tank tops, in moments that felt vulnerable but safe because she said it was art. I never signed anything. I never agreed to anything beyond a few curated Instagram posts. And now people were paying to see me? Clicking through galleries I didn't even know existed? I knew I had to confront her. But how do you even start that conversation? "Hey, did you monetize my identity without telling me?" "Hey, did you sell parts of me to strangers for profit?" There's no easy way to ask that. There's no version of that conversation that doesn't rupture something. But I had to know, I had to hear it from her mouth, even if parts of me already knew the answer. I waited until I felt calm enough to speak without crying or screaming, and then I texted her, "Hey, can we talk?" She replied instantly, "Of course. Coffee later?" I said yes. But what I planned to say, what I thought I'd be able to hold together in some neat, rational package, all of it unraveled the moment I saw her face, smiling like nothing was wrong. The cafe we met at was one of those trendy little places with mismatched furniture and plants hanging from every corner, the kind where they serve drinks with leaves and flowers floating in them like tiny edible spells. Clara was already there when I arrived, seated by the window with a latte in her hand, and that same effortless cool she always seemed to carry like the world bent slightly in her favor without her ever needing to ask. She waved me over, like nothing was wrong, like we hadn't drifted into some unspoken tension over the past few weeks. "Hey," she beamed, "you look tired." It took everything in me not to flinch. I sat down across from her, the edge of my coat still cold from the outside air, and stared at her for a moment without speaking. She sipped her drink, raised an eyebrow, waited, and then I said it. Not angrily, not dramatically, just plainly, "Are you selling my photos?" Her expression faltered. Barely. Just a flicker, a twitch in the corner of her mouth, the slightest widening of her eyes. And then, just as quickly, she recovered. "What are you talking about?" she asked, smiling like it was a joke I'd pulled from thin air. I didn't smile back. "Online," I said. "Behind a paywall. You know what I'm talking about. You watermarked them, changed the background blur, but didn't crop out my tattoo. People have been messaging me. A guy at your party literally said I was part of some exclusive set." There was a long silence, and then she sighed. Not the sigh of someone who's been caught, but the sigh of someone who's annoyed you figured it out. "Okay," she said slowly, setting her cup down. "You're blowing this way out of proportion." My heart thudded. "I didn't sell anything explicit," she continued, like that made it better. "They're just portraits. Same ones I post on Instagram, maybe edited a bit differently. It's not like you're naked or anything, it's artistic, and I'm the one who took the photos. They're my work. Of me, I said, my voice sharper than I wanted. They're photos of me. She rolled her eyes. You're acting like I betrayed you. I boosted your image. People think you're beautiful. You could have made money with me, you know. I even thought about splitting it. But you've always been weird about stuff like this. Weird. That word sank like lead in my chest. It wasn't just betrayal, it was the way she said it, like I was the unreasonable one. Like it wasn't a violation, just a branding decision I hadn't signed off on. She framed it as exposure, as empowerment, like she'd done me a favor by turning me into a product and never telling me. I stared at her, really looked at her, and for the first time I didn't see my friend. I saw someone who had been using me, someone who saw me not as a person but as material. You need to take them down, I said, quietly, flatly. She shrugged. It's not that easy. There are subscriptions. People have already paid. I could get in trouble. I leaned in. You already are in trouble. If you don't remove every single photo, I will go public. I'll contact the site. I'll tell them I never consented to any of it. I'll talk to a lawyer. Her mouth tightened. Don't be dramatic. But I wasn't being dramatic. I was done letting her minimize and twist what she'd done. Done pretending it was just a misunderstanding. This wasn't about art or exposure or aesthetics. This was about control. About her taking something that belonged to me, my image, my body, my privacy, and using it for her gain. We didn't finish our drinks. I walked out, trembling with adrenaline, and didn't look back. Later that night, she messaged me. Fine, I'll take them down. Don't make this uglier than it has to be. I didn't respond. I didn't thank her. I didn't forgive her. I sat in my room, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the empty folder on my desktop where I'd once kept the early shoots we did together, shoots I'd loved at the time. Shoots that made me feel confident and seen, and I deleted them. Because now they felt like something else entirely. Days passed. The silence between us, once filled with casual memes and spontaneous voice notes, stretched into a vacuum so vast it felt like a second betrayal all its own. There was no apology. No real acknowledgement of the violation. Just her message, cold, defensive, transactional, promising to take the photos down as though she were doing me a favor instead of righting a wrong. And sure, she might have removed them from one platform, but how could I know if copies existed elsewhere? Screenshots? Downloads? Files renamed and tucked away in some corner of the internet where my face would keep being sold behind glass I couldn't see through? That kind of breach doesn't disappear with the deleted folder. I started to question everything. Every photo she'd ever taken of me. Every moment I trusted her with my image, my likeness, my vulnerabilities. Even photos I'd once loved, shots where she'd captured me laughing in the golden haze of a late afternoon, or standing in profile in a coat that made me feel powerful now, felt tainted. Like I was looking at someone else. Someone exposed. Worse still, mutual friends noticed the fallout. A few reached out hesitantly. Hey, is everything okay with you and Clara? She said you had a falling out over a project. One even said Clara had mentioned I overreacted to a misunderstanding about content she posted online. That she'd blurred my face, that it wasn't that kind of site. The gaslighting wasn't even private anymore. It made me realize just how deep her justification went, that she'd rather convince others I was unstable than admit what she did was wrong. I started replaying every conversation we'd ever had, where I'd brushed off the way she talked over me, or spun narratives to suit her needs. The subtle digs about how I didn't market myself well, or didn't understand what sells. I used to think it was just her being brutally honest. Now I knew better. I found myself spiraling late at night, imagining what strangers had seen, wondering if anyone had recognized me, if my name had ever been shared, if Clara had ever let a detail slip in DMs, even anonymously, that pointed someone back to me. The mere possibility left me nauseous. And the worst part? I still missed her. Not the version of her who did this, but the girl I used to walk home with after class. The one who made playlists for every mood and could recite entire scenes from our favorite movies. The one who once stayed up all night with me before a deadline, feeding me coffee and cinnamon toast while we edited photos together on her tiny couch. That girl felt real. That friendship felt real. But now I didn't know if it had ever been, or if I'd just been the muse she used until she found a way to monetize my presence. Eventually, I decided to talk to someone professionally. Not because I couldn't handle it, I was still getting out of bed, still showing up to work, still functioning, but because I felt hollowed out, like I'd lost something foundational and didn't know how to replace it. My therapist, a soft-voiced woman named Janine, didn't judge or probe. She just asked, gently, what it had felt like to have my trust broken in such a personal, digital way. It felt like being sold, I said. But the currency wasn't just money. It was attention, control, validation, and none of it was mine. Janine nodded. That sounds incredibly violating. It was the first time I'd heard someone say that word out loud. Violating. I hadn't let myself use it because it felt too big, too heavy, reserved for worse things, more extreme traumas. But she said it without flinching, and something in me exhaled. By the end of that session, I wasn't healed, but I was a little less alone. And that, at the time, was enough. Weeks passed, and I tried to build a new rhythm for myself. The apartment felt quieter without Clara's laughter echoing from the kitchen or her music bleeding through the thin walls. Quieter, but not peaceful, not yet. The echoes of everything that had happened still lingered in the corners of my mind, especially in the small ways grief always does. I'd find an old screenshot of a message she'd sent me, or a picture of the two of us at some event, arms slung over each other's shoulders like we were unshakable. I kept them for a while, as if deleting them would somehow delete the parts of me that once believed in that friendship. But eventually, I started cleaning house, not just digitally, but emotionally too. I stopped explaining myself to people who didn't ask how I was really doing. I stopped defending my boundaries to those who only wanted to poke holes in them. I realized that the violation wasn't just what Clara had done, it was how she'd made me feel like I didn't have the right to be angry about it. Like my discomfort was a burden she could dismiss with a shrug and a, "You're being dramatic." That realization became a turning point. One afternoon, I decided to write everything down. Not to post, not to expose her, not for vengeance, just for me. I wrote out what had happened, from the first time I trusted her with a photo, to the moment I saw my face on that site. I wrote about how it made me feel, what it shattered in me, and what it taught me. I didn't hold back. I let the words bleed onto the page, honest and raw, because I needed to see the whole thing outside of myself. I needed to name it. I needed to reclaim the narrative. That process was more healing than I expected. There's something about putting a story into language, especially one that's been tangled in confusion and shame, that starts to dissolve the power it holds over you. It felt like opening a window in a stuffy room. The air shifted. I could breathe. Not long after that, I decided to reach out to one of our mutual friends. Someone who'd been kind to me in passing. Someone I suspected had seen through Clara's curated version of events, but hadn't known how to approach me. I didn't go in guns blazing. I just said I wanted to clear the air, to offer my side. Not to cause drama, just to be heard. We met for coffee. At first, the conversation was hesitant, but then, the more I spoke, the more their eyes widened. "She told us she had your permission," they said, their voice trailing off. "She made it sound like you two were doing it together, like it was a project." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd. Clara hadn't just broken my trust. She'd rewritten the entire reality of what happened to protect her ego. It was like she'd photoshopped the truth the way she edited pictures, cropping out the parts that didn't flatter her narrative. After that conversation, the guilt that had been festering in me, the second-guessing, the internal debate about whether I'd been too upset, began to dissipate. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't imagining things. What happened to me was real, and it was wrong. That simple validation, offered without agenda, without performance, was more healing than anything Clara could have ever said. I walked home from that coffee shop feeling taller somehow, like I'd reclaimed a piece of myself I hadn't realized was still missing, not because someone else gave it back to me, but because I chose to take it. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. It wasn't over, not entirely. Healing rarely comes in clean lines or full stops. There were still moments of doubt, of hurt, of anger, but there was also clarity now, and that clarity gave me the strength to keep walking forward, even if I didn't know exactly where the path would lead. What mattered most was that I knew who I was again, and no one could sell that. Spring arrived slowly, like a gentle apology for the weight of the winter before. The sunlight spilled into my apartment in longer strands now, casting golden lines across the floor that made the quiet feel less lonely and more sacred. I started opening the windows again, letting air in. Letting old air out. There's something poetic about how spaces can hold on to stories, especially stories that hurt, and how sometimes the only way to let them go is to quite literally change the air. I rearranged the furniture, switched out the photos on the walls for ones that didn't have Clara in the frame. Not out of bitterness, I wasn't trying to erase her, but because it no longer made sense to keep honoring something that had stopped honoring me a long time ago. I started building a new kind of peace, not just through what I removed from my space, but through what I invited in. Slowness, stillness, boundaries. And then one afternoon, months after the whole thing had exploded, I got an email. It was from the website that had hosted my photos. A standard template, cold, emotionless, saying that some content linked to my name had been flagged for violation of their terms, and that it had been taken down permanently. Just like that. A digital tombstone. No apology, no recognition of what it cost me, but still a small, quiet win. I sat there staring at the screen for a long time. It should have felt more satisfying, I think. More triumphant. But what I felt was more like relief. Like a wound finally scabbing over. Like a door gently clicking shut. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. What mattered wasn't what they did or didn't say. What mattered was that I wasn't afraid anymore. Not afraid of people finding out. Not afraid of people misunderstanding. Not afraid of being judged for my anger or my boundaries, or the fact that I had taken back control of my own narrative. I began, slowly, reconnecting with people again. Real friends, the ones who didn't treat me like a convenience or a commodity, the ones who asked me how I was and actually listened. There were fewer of them than there used to be, but somehow the space between us felt more honest, more grounded. And in that honesty, I started finding myself again. I took up photography. Not the kind Clara had twisted into something transactional, but the kind that made me feel alive. I went outside more, walked unfamiliar paths with my camera, capturing small, beautiful things that no one else was noticing, a leaf with veins like lace, the way the light caught the edge of a stone, the delicate shadow a branch cast over a puddle. It felt like I was reclaiming something sacred, my own gaze, my own eye. The ability to see beauty not as something to be consumed or sold, but as something to be felt, to be held, to be honored. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't documenting moments for anyone else, just for me. And when I looked at those photos, quiet, unassuming snapshots of a world still spinning, I realized that the real story wasn't about Clara anymore. It wasn't about what she did, or how she lied, or how she tried to turn a piece of me into a product. It was about after. About choosing to rebuild, to see the world differently, to see myself differently. I was no longer a victim of that story. I was its author. And I was already writing a better ending.